Hello everybody, I am Cassidy. I'm the hippie Catholic. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe to hear the conversation. I am here with Brian, and he is he's a friend of Dorothy. He's a friend of Dorothy Day, and he runs a Catholic worker in Iowa. And yeah, I'm just really excited to have you on, Brian. Could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, I'm happy to be here with you. I grew up in and around Green Bay, Wisconsin, and was not in a particularly religious household or anything. I went to college for 1 year, raised nominally Catholic, and when I was 19 years old, I dropped out of school, and without a whole lot of idea what the Catholic worker was, I went off to New York. Lived at the Catholic worker there for the next 4 years. That was 1975. And after 4 years there, I moved to a house of hospitality in Davenport, Iowa on the Mississippi River, and was there for 7 years. That's where I got married and our kids were born, 2 children, grown and gone, and doing hospitality to the homeless there. And after 7 years, my wife and I moved in 1986 here, this little farm we're just 7 miles from the Missouri border in southwest Iowa. Living here, raising goats and gardening, and Betsy is a weaver. That's part of how we make our living, and living the agronomic university part of the Catholic worker. I've also been very involved in peace activism, direct action. I just returned last month. I was in Europe for 2 weeks protesting nuclear weapons. The United States is keeping, in 5 different countries of Europe, keeping nuclear weapons on foreign bases ready to be delivered by the foreign militaries at the moment that somebody decides it's the end of the human experiment, and they keep ready and practicing for that. So this has been the last couple of years. I've been working a lot on the issues of these nuclear weapons that are being largely made in Kansas City, not too far from here. And I'm also, I work for the Nevada Desert Experience. And so go to Nevada several times a year. And that's started out with it's an interfaith group that protests that the nuclear test site, which is on, we work very closely with the Western Shoshone people whose land was taken to test nuclear weapons. There's no place on earth that's been bombed more than this little bit of the Nevada desert. Also, Creech Air Force Base is right near there. That's the center, the place where the whole drone warfare, automated war by remote control is based. So involved in protests there, and this has brought me various places. Over the years, I've spent about 2 years in prison and jails, for these actions. Very valuable part of my education, I feel, continuing, which is a continuing education. So yeah, I live a life. I'm on the farm. Pre-COVID, especially on the farm about half the time, and the other half the time anywhere at all.
Honestly, I just have to say, I respect the work that you're doing so much, especially protesting war and nuclear war and stuff, because I feel like that something I'm Gen Z, by the way, so it's I feel like that Gen Z focuses a lot on climate change, but we don't talk about nukes at all.
Yeah.
And it's quite frankly, it's pretty strange that we don't. It's kind of went over our generation's heads, and it's just everything that's been going on with Ukraine, everything, but not just Ukraine. I mean, we live in a war-torn world, and I feel like that, especially in the United States, I feel like that the horror of war has been sanitized so much in the media of that we just are kind of desensitized to the trauma of war. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing with that. How did you meet Dorothy Day?
Okay, I'll tell you, a little bit more background. When I was in high school, starting to read the Gospels and the lives of the saints and things like this, pretty much on my own. And was very taken by it all, but I was not very taken by the Catholicism around me. I lived in a very Catholic culture in Green Bay. And I didn't see it lived out. And I was looking for religious orders for a while. And I think the main reason why I went to the Worker, I wrote them a letter and asked and got a postcard back with very little information, but said, if you want to join us, you can just come and join us. And I think just by the fact that they would take me, I didn't want to go, I didn't want to finish college, and I didn't want to go through a whole, years of formation. I pictured more the fishermen leaving their nets, or St. Francis taking his clothes off and walking into the sunset. And the idea that I would write to these communities and be told to wait. And also when I visited a lot of them, I found that they lived their lives pretty much with a lot of the same bourgeois notions and goals as the secular world. And I thought this has to make a difference, or it's nothing. It can't be just a Sunday thing, or it can't be just a job. Dropped out of school and got a ticket and went to New York. I met Dorothy, I think, the first day that I was there. And I was, more than 24 hours on buses. And just, kind of a scared kid away from home too. And so I was 19 and she was 78. I didn't know much about her, but I knew that she was a personage. I knew that she was somebody important and somebody, and somebody to be admired. And I was very touched and also kind of frightened, because she treated me like I knew a lot more than I knew. I didn't know anything about anything. And she was asking me about labor issues and asking me about what I thought about what the Vietnamese were doing in Cambodia at that time in history. Very, very important things. And she wasn't like trying to feel me out or test me. I felt a little bit like that, but I knew it wasn't that. I did feel put on the spot and nervous and afraid of saying something really stupid. But I think she really believed that I was somebody, just off the bus from Green Bay, that I was somebody who had something to offer, something to say that would make a difference, even to this woman who'd been all over the world and written all these books, been interviewed in Time magazine and everything, that she really felt like I had something, a piece to give. And I know some of my other friends and contemporaries had that same kind of experience with her. Say, Dorothy recognized something very important in me. And I don't think that's true in my case, maybe for them. But I think for me, it was like, that's just the way she treated everybody. She didn't dismiss anyone. There's a very famous story that the first time Robert Coles, who was one of the world's eminent child psychologists, I don't think he was yet, but he was, he came down from Harvard to see her, and he's dressed like a guy from Harvard in his three-piece suit and everything. He knew that was a mistake and he shouldn't have done that. So he shows up at the Worker and knocks on the door, and they let him in. This was, a decade or two before I met her, and found Dorothy in a deep discussion with a woman who was clearly inebriated. And Dorothy did not interrupt her conversation for a while until Dr. Robert Coles is standing there just and Dorothy turns to him and says, "Oh, were you waiting to talk to one of us?"
Oh, I love that. I love her.
He wasn't assuming this man in a suit was there for her and not for this other person who the world would look at, and Dr. Coles looked at that time as being somebody with nothing to say or nothing. So she valued people like that and valued everyone like that.
She has a writer's heart, right? So it's like, I feel like that's something I've learned, like, from I've been serving the elderly for the past couple years, and something that I've learned from them is that there's no such thing as an uninteresting person. There is no such thing as an uninteresting person. There is always somebody that you can learn from, and everybody has a story. And I feel like that Dorothy being like, you know, she has like the soul of a writer, so she's always like looking for like stories from people, and like it's just kind of like instinctive, and I just think that that's a really beautiful thing about her.
And to go get a little bit theological is Dorothy recognized the truth. When people talk about the real presence of Christ, they usually are meaning in the Eucharist, and Dorothy had a great devotion to the Eucharist. But Christ is present. We know from Matthew 25, what you do to the least of these, you do to me. And it's the prisoner, it's the sick, it's the she actually, in a very radical way, recognized and had and worshipped Christ in the presence. You know, the way she put it, since she might have stolen it from somebody, Christ in its most distressing of disguises. You know, that reverence she had, even for her enemies, even for the police, even for the capitalists, even for the bishops. she recognized, the way the Quakers say, that which is of God in everyone, and had a real devotion. And I think that's one of the main things that she has, that she has to teach us, is just the sacredness of human beings. And in Matthew 25 too, it looks on, is, I think Christ is even more manifest the more, the more distressed, the more suffering someone is. The more that Christ can be reverenced in that person. And it's, I'm not saying that it's easy or that it was ever easy for her, but it's, I think that's a very real, that's a very real and, very important part of her spirituality.
Yeah, like I think that seeing Christ literally in everyone is something that we need like so much right now. I mean, like I'm preaching to myself as well, of like, I just feel like that, like we've all become very polarized, and it's like, and it's kind of like, one of the things I love about Catholic social teaching is that it talks about fighting for the common good, fighting for like human dignity, like that's like the foundation of what we do. And I feel like that's so needed in the modern world, like, and that's in leftist spaces too. Like I feel like that also, like a big part of why like Dorothy Day is such like an awesome figure is that like she was like a very active pacifist. Like she taught how you can be disobedient or be a loyal dissident without resorting to violence.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I feel like, is we need that. It's so easy for like people to just see somebody as an other and just like dehumanize them, and it's just really sad when that happens. And I mean, I think that's been with humanity since like Adam and Eve, or when Cain and Abel. I think that's been with us for a long time. What was it like being involved in the Catholic worker during like Vietnam and like the hippie stuff? Like, what was that like?
Well, I was at a very, I think a very interesting time. A lot of historians of the time say that it was kind of a downtime, but I think most people look at their late teens and 20s as an exciting time. So it was exciting for me. But so I turned 18 in 1974, and the draft ended in that year. So I just missed it. And I think one thing that struck me when I got to New York and met people is, as much as I was, I think that most of the people I knew around Green Bay, there wasn't much of a peace movement certainly not anything that I was aware of. And my family and my school and my church were all pretty disgusted with the war, but they were going to if I had been 2 years younger, I might have ended up there, and nobody would have spoken up. Nobody would have warned me, don't do it. Nobody would have, you know, and I met very quickly, not only people a couple years older than me who actually went to prison for not registering for the draft or not answering induction, but I also met people like Father Dan Berrigan, who just recently gotten out of prison for several years for destroying draft records. And I think that there's a way. Your generation has been betrayed by mine in lots of ways, but the way that my generation, I believe, was betrayed by our elders was by letting that war go on. You know, sending young people off to war. And I met people who my elders who had made great sacrifices to stop the war, and in part, you know, for me. And I think, there's a historian, Dan McCannon, wrote a book about the Catholic worker after Dorothy, and he talks about that time, and it really resonates with me, is that more than even now, there was talk that the word generation gap, the term generation gap was coined around that time. And there's supposedly a huge, the disparity and the conflict in generations was particularly harsh at that time in history, some people think. And he said that the Catholic worker at that time was experiencing a more of a generational continuity rather than a gap. And I really appreciated that. I really felt that my, I didn't, I was being mentored, but I really didn't get that feeling of having, I felt like people like Phil Berrigan and Liz McAllister and Dorothy, the other people, the house, I wasn't treated like a kid. I was embraced as a coworker and somebody cooperating as a comrade. Yeah, the hippie era was kind of winding down at that time as well. And I think the Lower East Side of New York was still at that point a very, very cheap place to live. And largely an immigrant community. The old people were the older people were Russian and Italian and Ukrainian, and they were Jewish, and they were Orthodox Christian, and they were, and then the older people were from Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Black people from the South, from that great migration from the South, just a generation away from the southeastern United States. And it was just a really a wonderful mix. And again, historians look at that time in New York City as kind of a bad time, but it was really a good place for me to grow when I was that young.
Like it takes a village to raise a child, and when you feel like you have like that kind of community around you, it provides like a foundation that you can carry with you the rest of your life. Like the Berrigans are, I look up to them a lot. I don't know as much about them as I know about Dorothy, but like everything that I've read about the Berrigans is super awesome. I know that they came out with a documentary film about the Berrigans. I've been trying to find where to watch that, but like I haven't been able to find it. I watched a documentary on Dorothy Day on PBS actually, and I remember that there was a segment of that documentary that said that that like the first draft card burner was from the Catholic worker, and I was like, dang, that's so cool. Like, I don't know, it's cool to see how the Catholic worker like evolved with the time periods, and like it worked to like provide for like the various needs of people, like from the 30s to the 60s to and into today really. And it's like I think that also something that interests me a lot too is how like the Catholic worker after Dorothy Day passed away, like how the Catholic worker was confronted with like, are we going to be like a Dorothy Day museum? Are we even going to keep going on at all? Or are we going to keep innovating with the times like we've always done? And I
Mhm.
feel like that even like I've talked to like so many different Catholic worker houses, and I feel like they all have like different answers to like some Catholic workers I've spoken to are kind of, I guess I'll call them like the reconstructionists of like they kind of want to like stick with what, well, this is what Dorothy would do, this is what, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna do. And then there's like I have met more people though that are like, okay, we're gonna be doing this kind of like in the spirit of Dorothy Day to like keep it something that's alive, like not like that the history of her life isn't important, but it's like I feel like that it's like you look at the history of the Catholic worker, and that's what the Catholic worker is all about, is
Mm.
you know, evolving to meet the needs of the people at that time.
Yeah, I think I often tell people if the first time I met Dorothy Day, if I told her I'd come to follow in her footsteps, she would have put me on a bus home for that day. She wouldn't have put up with that at all, and she resented the personality cult. One of the very important book about the Catholic worker that came out like in 1973, Harsh and Dreadful Love by Dr. William Miller, which is a very important book for me. I think it's the only thing I read about the Catholic worker before I got there. A few years ago, a bunch of her letters were published, and one of them was a letter to Dr. Miller really scolding him, saying, why did you write this book all about me and not about all these great young people who are here doing all the work? and she was, yeah, she, it was never supposed to be the Dorothy Day movement. And it really is only since she's died that she's kind of beyond criticism. When she was alive, she was getting it all the time. But she's not the measure that, she's not the standard that we measure ourselves or the movement. I mean, we're following the gospel, and it's not following Dorothy Day. And she had her insights, and she had her ideas, and they're very important, and we grow from them. See, one thing that happened about the time I got there too, and I've just recently read her On Pilgrimage columns from the 70s. Robert Ellsberg edited and put it out. It's in a very nice form. Is how people who, it was only about the time that I arrived there that I was a part of a first wave of people making the Catholic worker their life. There were always a few very, the people who'd been at the Catholic worker a long time were very singular and amazing people, but they were a handful. And I was at the Catholic worker in New York for 4 years, and the place was always hopping. There were always new people coming, wonderful young people for the most part. Today, the New York Catholic worker, most of the people who are there have been there for 20 or 30 years. And that was almost unheard of. And this is around the country. There were people for the first time, there were people coming from like in 1970 on who are still with the movement. And it's a big change. And Dorothy was, I was also very much struck reading about with Dorothy's columns from the time that I was there, is just how much she loved and respected us, and how much she trusted us. The things that would get her angry very often was when people were expecting her to be the leader, the decider of everything. So she said that she was like a dictator trying to legislate herself out of existence. and how much people she wrote once how people yearn for it and how they hate it. Because they're wanting her to be the boss. And So yeah, it has to be. It's again the philosophy of personalism that she and Peter Moore espoused. It's a personal response, and it's going to be different for everybody. Is that we meet the needs of the time. We're not employees of a tax exempt charity kind of thing, following our job description. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing for some people to do, but that's not what the Catholic worker is. And when somebody comes to the door, for good or bad, they're not being met with somebody who is a functionary of a bureaucracy. They're meeting a person. That's why it's a very different thing from social work. And I'm not criticizing social work. It has its place, but it's having no very few Catholic worker houses keep records of anybody staying there. We know nobody's social security number. So yeah, there are, and the worker is bigger in numbers. This book I referenced before, Dan McCannon's book, The Catholic Worker After Dorothy, and his study was the radical Christian movements of the 19th century, like the Shakers and the Oneida community and all the Amanas, all these communal groups that came and went, and they didn't survive their charismatic leaders. The people who found their great foundresses died, and founders died, and a generation or so was gone. But he said that the Catholic worker is noting the Catholic worker has never been bigger than it is now. There's more houses. It's all over the world. It's much more diverse. He said that the secret why the Catholic worker has persevered is that it's never tried to persevere. There never was the idea of we're trying to make something that's going to last into the next generations, that it's okay to be something that just keep inventing itself. The Holy Spirit does not only work in old established institutions. The Holy Spirit can work in a group of friends who get together and do something for a few years, and then it goes away, and that's okay. And maybe it doesn't go away. Maybe it does last longer, but that's okay too. But that's never the point. The point is the people. Just before, a few years before I got to the New York Catholic Worker, and I know that not all Catholic worker houses espouse Dorothy's abhorrence with what has since been called the nonprofit industrial complex. And I think the realities are harder now about owning property and just living in the world. It's much harder for an informal group of people, but it was absolutely, the Catholic world is not going to incorporate, not going to structure. We're against corporations, not trying to be one. And to be a 501c3 charity, you have to form yourself as a corporation with a president, vice president, and the whole thing. And you have to be reporting to the state and all. And it's difficult to maintain yourself as just a family that's doing some stuff rather than an institution. Well, in 1972, the IRS came up with a number of a couple $100,000 that they said the Catholic worker owed in back taxes. And they gave the ultimatum, pay this money. And at the time, the Vietnam War was going on, and there were several Catholic workers in prison for not paying their taxes to support the war. Or form yourself in structure yourself as a corporation. And Dorothy wrote, I just really hate that word structure. And we're not going to do it. And she recognized this wonderful thing. She recognized that it would be better for what the IRS threatened was to sell the house in the city and the farm at Tivoli, to sell them at auction and seize the money for these back taxes. And she said, better that the Catholic worker be made homeless than have it become a corporation. And I think I think that really was like a very important point in history for the Catholic worker, which is unlike a lot of the religious orders were saying, like the Franciscans, the early Franciscans, they own no property. They didn't own the houses that they were, that they were living in, and they had to be poor. Is to realize that to maintain themselves as an institution, they had to, get church approval. They had to, they had to become a legal entity, and a lot was lost. And I'm not dissing the Franciscans for that. I'm saying the Catholic worker is different. The Catholic worker said, no, we're not going down that road. And it's better to have no Catholic worker than a Catholic worker incorporated. And I think that was a very, I think maybe the Catholic worker is still here because, in part because of that decision that Dorothy and the other people, the New York Catholic worker, made.
We can really learn a lot about legacy by seeing how like the Catholic worker has continued to flourish and stuff. Because I feel like that like so many movements throughout history have sought immortality, and the Catholic worker, like you just said, it never really sought that. It just sought to meet. How do we take care of people? How do we meet people where they're at just day by day? And that's why it's still here. I'm friends with a lot of like secular leftists and stuff. And something that whenever I bring up the Catholic worker, they're like, the Catholic work, always have like so much respect for the Catholic worker. They're like, the Catholic worker is like one of the most successful anarchist organizations in the United States that like survived. Like a lot of the other ones did not. Like, and it's anarchist in the way that like it refused to be like incorporated into anything. And like whenever you ask like these leftists, about like, oh, what does anarchism look like in America, the Catholic worker always gets brought up like somehow. I always try to bring up that like that she was like a political radical. I feel like that people just need to know, like, even if like they disagree with her political standings, I still feel like that it's like, if you want to like know the true history of somebody, you need to know those things. And if you need to wrestle with them, but don't like say like something that I've seen like a lot of Catholic publications write, like they'll kind of frame it like that Dorothy Day like repented of her communism in a way, or like like frame it in like a conversion kind of a thing. But it's like you crack open the long loneliness, you see who she was friends with, you see what she was doing, and it's like, yeah, she might not have self-identified as like a communist, but like it was, she had a lot of respect for people that did identify as communists and were helping the poor. So I feel like that like something that like concerns me with her like being on the road like to becoming a saint is just like, the sanitizing of her story to fit another hierarchy. And I mean, especially it's like you think about like how she sparred with like the bishop and was told to take Catholic out of the Catholic worker name and stuff. And I feel like that happens to progressives a lot. I think that Dorothy is such like an example of like a loyal dissident, like she was fiercely loyal to like the heart of the law, fiercely loyal to Jesus, fiercely loyal to like people, like to who the people that she was helping to take care of. But she was not going to cave to like hierarchical authority.
Yeah, she was not subservient, and she often spoke about the great freedom that Catholic lay people have is a freedom that the bishops in the canon law did not recognize that she claimed for herself. She absolutely refused to even recognize Index of Forbidden Books. Part of history you might know that lasted till 1966. At one point, the Daily Worker, the communist newspaper, had its mailing list taken away from the FBI seized their mailing list during the McCarthy era, and Dorothy offered the Catholic Worker mailing list to the to the Daily World, which was on the Index. It was a sin for any Catholic to read or possess this, that Dorothy often read and quoted from. They turned her down when she knew that they were going to. So it was a symbolic symbolic gesture of solidarity. What she often said is, I love the church for Christ made visible, not for itself, which is so often a scandal to me. And she would quote Guardini, Father Romano Guardini, one of the great theologians of the Second Vatican Council, saying, the church is the cross on which Christ is crucified, and you can't separate Christ from the cross. She loved the church as Christ, present among us. Reflection of that was not in the hierarchy. I've been looking through her readings lately and seeing this thing that comes up over and over and over again in her writings, where she uses quotes from scripture. In peace is my bitterness most bitter, telling us our enemies would be of our own household. And she recognized those enemies of her household being the bishops. And she didn't disown them. They were of her household. And she knows that we are called to love our enemies. After Cardinal Spellman, talking about the Vietnam War, said, my country, right or wrong, Dorothy wrote a beautiful piece where she was in front of the Blessed Sacrament, just in agony over this. Like, how can I forgive? I'm called to forgive. How can I turn hatred into love for an enemy? And the enemy she was talking about was her cardinal, not the Vietnamese. But she said that, used those words many times in her life, and always referring to the clergy.
I think that she gives people a lot of hope by like the example that she sets, because like something that like you use the word scandal in something that I see a lot. I receive these comments myself, but I also see other Catholic creators get these comments of like fellow Catholics writing that you're scandalizing people because you're talking about, the abuse crisis, or you're scandalizing people because you're talking about controversial like stuff like war, or controversial stuff like, like social justice issues. Like you'll see people like because I feel like that now we're kind of at like a point in the church where like I feel like that there's just such a disconnect between the laity and the clergy. Dissent from social teachings, it's very common, and it should be expected, and it's not. And also it's like dissent is not always a bad thing. It's not always a scandalizing thing. I feel like that a lot of dissidents within the Catholic Church that maybe struggle with like certain teachings, or just outright in good conscience like cannot assent to them, they get labeled as like scandalizers or people that are causing division, when really they're recognizing division that was already there. I just think that Dorothy Day is just a really good example of somebody who was still like a fiercely loyal Catholic, but also wrestled with stuff, and she was not going to just like be submissive to something that she felt was wrong. I'm sure there's people that accused saying, oh, that's so scandalous, but like, how is that more scandalous than the fact that there's millions of people dying in wars and suffering in terrible conditions? Like how is standing up to a bishop, how is that more scandalizing than those sins? It's something that I always struggle with.
Yeah, I think that's really essential, and it's one of the sad things about people trying to sanitize Dorothy today. And I think some of the people who are most critical of the Catholic worker movement as it is today are the same people who would have criticized Dorothy when she was alive. She got that criticism all the time, and now they because Dorothy has been made holy, that they can't blame her for it, so they blame other people. But I think that's just so essential, because this is who she speaks to. She never intended to speak to the pious. The first issue of the Catholic Worker was addressed to the people, the people sitting on the park benches looking for work, the people not knowing where their next meal is coming from. This is who she was trying to talk to. I know you have a question that you sent me about my experience meeting with the diocesan tribunal on Dorothy Day's holiness. And that was a gas in a lot of ways. But one of the things that they were most concerned with is, did Dorothy in her life, did she help or hurt the church's reputation? Yeah, did she make people, did she make, did her life make the church more, put it up in the polls, say? And I just as you mentioned, I said it certainly did with a certain group of people. And I think, maybe the people that mattered to Jesus the most. And I said, I know people who've been guests in our houses, and people I've protested with, and people I've gone to jail with, who, when you bring up the Catholic Church, they will say they have no reason whatsoever to have any respect for it, but for the Catholic worker. That for so many people, the Catholic worker has been the saving grace for the reputation of the Catholic Church. So I said, among certain people, it's enhanced, the reputation, and for other people, is a scandal. The question about whether Dorothy was an anarchist is really comes up, and it's so strange because there's so many people that her writings are right there say that either she wasn't one, or the kind of anarchist that she was so different that it doesn't count. She meant something really different by it, or, as you say, it's something that she repented of, that was part of her sinful youth, and she cast it off and cut off her relations with all those people, and utterly untrue. But she said, once in the 70s, she wrote that if people are upset by the word anarchist, then maybe they need to be upset.
I love that. Honestly.
Yeah, she didn't say, I'm apologizing, I'm sorry, did I hurt your feelings? No, it's like, if this is upsetting, okay.
Well, and it's like, something that I wish I could say to people is like, just because you feel scandalized doesn't mean that what is going on is scandal. Like, just because you're challenged by something, or challenged by, somebody having ear piercings or a leather jacket in mass or something, or like that you're scandalized by somebody openly dissenting, maybe with teachings regarding like maybe like LGBTQ issues or something like that, it's like, how is that more scandalizing than the fact that LGBTQ people are more likely to experience violence? I get so angry when I see that there's Catholic churches that have lost like their Catholic status because they had like a Black Lives Matter flag, or like an LGBTQ flag, and they're being like accused of scandal. And I'm like, how is this scandalizing, but the murdering of people isn't the scandal? Like, that's something that has never made sense to me. And I feel like that it's something that runs deep in the hierarchical Catholic Church. I think that Dorothy Day, like you said, I feel like that she speaks to the population of people that are like the Good Samaritans. From reading her writings and stuff, like, she just seems like a very like intuitive person, and just a very empathetic person. I mean, like, one of the things I love about her is like I remember you shared a letter that she wrote you when you were in jail. Like, yeah, could you tell us about that too? I mean, I know that's like a little off, little side tangent, but I just loved that.
This is hanging on the wall here.
Oh my goodness, it's so exciting.
Yeah, I was in jail in 1978 for 2 weeks, Clear County Jail in Colorado. And I was there because we were with a group of people sitting on the railroad tracks of the plant at Rocky Flats, where they were making the plutonium cores, the pits, they call them now, of all the nuclear bombs. And it was a terrible ecological disaster as well. It's been shut down for years. The FBI raided the place not long after us and shut it down, and it's the cleanup is going to be a long time coming. I got a postcard from her. It says, "We're all remembering you in our prayers." Have you read Saloni's Bread and Wine? He says, one voice crying out upsets the state. Love in Christ, Dorothy Day.
Oh,
So I love how she could say, I don't know if you can see it there. She can say, upset the state, love in Christ. And that wasn't
yeah.
Ignazio Saloni, the writer of Bread and Wine. That was a book. That was the one thing that I found that I had in common with Dorothy when I met her. Is that was one of my favorite books, and it was one of hers. And Salone was one of the founders of the Italian Communist Party, who during the fascist years was in exile. Yeah, he later, under the Stalinist purges, he left the Communist Party, and he called himself a Christian without a church and a communist without a party. And
Yeah.
Dorothy really had, they finally met once before they died. But Dorothy had a very, very close spiritual connection to this man whose life brought him out of the church, and her life brought her in, but for a lot of the same reasons.
It just like completely debunks all of the stuff, like, oh, she wasn't like, didn't respect communists anymore, and that like that's just completely like untrue. Also, like, I remember reading that she had written some stuff about Angela Davis as well, like supporting stuff that Angela Davis was doing.
Yes, and that was in the 70s when Angela Davis was on the run from the FBI.
Yeah.
This radical Black communist atheist, and by no means a pacifist. Dorothy wrote about her in the paper, and it's almost like a love letter. It's almost like she's an old white woman, and she's looking back and she's seeing this young, vibrant Black woman revolutionist, and she is just saying, "Oh, I love you." And she compares, she quotes the Magnificat regarding Angela Davis.
Yeah.
And saying, all generations will call her blessed, at a time when she was, vilified in the press, and the Dorothy could see in Angela Davis somebody who brought to mind our Blessed Mother.
It made me really reflect on like really the revolutionary nature of Mother Mary and of the gospel, and like, how it overthrew the empires of the world, and that the kingdom of God is at hand, and it's here now, and we can build it now if we just commit ourselves to it. So you talked about this a bit, but like, what would you want to talk more about your experiences with anti-war activism and stuff?
Yes, I think it's for me, it very much grew out of the Catholic worker. I was not. It took me a couple of years before I became a real activist in the worker, to see the it's not enough to serve soup on a soup line. There's reasons why people are homeless and people are out of work. There's reasons why our economy is the way it is. There's reasons behind the racial disparities. There's reasons behind like you're talking about, the LGBTQ communities. Not only homelessness, but so many other things that they experience out of proportion to the rest of the population. And there's reasons why that's happening. And it gets controversial when you start asking those questions. Dom Helder Câmara, the great bishop from Brazil, the way he put it was, when I feed the hungry, they call me a saint. When I ask why they're hungry, they call me a communist. And I think the way the Catholic worker goes about it, for the most part, is direct action. And I don't want to make that sound like that's not political. I think sometimes people see the Catholic worker and the Catholic worker anarchism, say it's apolitical, and it's not. There's all kinds of political action that's not in the ballot box, not in the horse trading and lesser evils kind of stuff that you have to do in politics, in electoral politics. So it's not like something ethereal and above, or just a matter of purity. It's direct action. I had an experience last October. I was in the Netherlands, and I was at one of these bases where they have US nuclear weapons. My personal carbon footprint is probably one of the greatest in the world. But I flew to Amsterdam and met with these friends. But if you see these F-16s and F-35s and Tornado fighter planes taking off, before they take off, there's this huge cloud of black acrid smoke and the ground shakes. And these planes that exist for nothing, they're not bringing people to get medical care or bringing kids to see grandma before she dies or anything. They're in the air 24 hours a day. They're practicing destroying the planet. And the amount of fuel being, the amount of greenhouse gases being produced by the minute. I think I can be, rather than my own purity, I can work on, that I travel very much with a sense of recognizing, that it's not harmless, but I still think I need to do it. So anyway, what we did, and our Dutch friends had told the police we were coming. It's a Dutch Air Force base, and the planes are Dutch planes. They're F-16s they bought from the United States, and they're flown by Dutch Air Force members. But the bombs is a US Air Force squadron there that keeps 20 nuclear bombs ready to put on those planes in a moment. I think to what's been happening since with just a few months later, Russia invaded Ukraine over the spread of NATO. I think we need to really consider, not to justify what Russia's doing at all, but to consider the provocation of having people practicing dropping nuclear bombs on you every day. Anyway, we show up and we tell them we're going to dig. We're going to dig a tunnel under the fence, and we were going to get on the runway and stop the takeoff of these planes. And there was at the time a big NATO exercise they do every fall called Steadfast Noon. Is this operation, and dozens of countries participate. So they're all practicing bombing Russia, and that's some Russians found that offensive. We go there expecting there's about 20 of us, and we go there expecting we pray and we sing and we the cops are there, and we're expecting we're going to get a shovel in the ground and have a tap on the shoulder and be taken away by the police. But that didn't happen. And we just kept digging and digging and looking over our shoulder, and the cops were just looking at us. And then these soldiers came on the other side of the fence, and they're standing there just watching us dig. Finally realized we're actually going to do this. And I think 8 of us, finally, we dug a hole deep because the fence went under the ground a couple of feet. We had to dig like 4 feet down and a couple feet over and dig up, and we come up on the sod on the other side and go through one at a time. And I'll tell you what, and I had just before leaving on that trip dug our sweet potatoes here on the farm. So I was in digging form. And it felt just like that. I think one thing it did for me, and speaking very personally about it, is and what the Catholic Church's theology on sacraments was very sacramental, because it was putting something kind of abstract, like I like to think I'm resisting nuclear weapons all the time, in all kinds of different ways, by writing and holding a sign at a demonstration, but this time, like, I'm digging, I'm putting muscle into it. And coming out the other side, all covered with red clay, it really felt like the baptism of going down under and coming up again, and it really was exhilarating. Then a young Dutch soldier came and spoke to me in Dutch, and I said, "I'm sorry, I don't understand." And he said, "Are you aware you're under arrest?" And I said, Well, I kind of figured I would be, but nobody told me. It was crazy. Nobody said don't do it or what the hell do you think you're doing? And I think very different from the United States, where doing something like this would be a very long prison sentence, and even maybe even taking our lives in our hands to do that kind of thing. Certainly, the U.S. bases have signs saying lethal force authorized and all. So there's a very gentle kind of thing happening in Netherlands, but nobody was mad at us. We were held for about 5 hours and released, and still could get charged criminally. It wasn't a huge success. We didn't reverse the arms race, but we didn't think we'd do it that day. It's going to be a long slog. But I just felt, it was one of the most exhilarating experiences I've ever had.
The imagery of like the red clay with like the baptism water was really compelling. I love sacramentals because it's like they have like, they tie, like you said, like the abstract to the material, and that's just very powerful. Thank you for all of the work that you're doing. Could you tell us a bit about your Catholic Worker House and like what like your like individual like mission is?
Talking about what happened in Holland brought to mind another very, very Catholic thing. I'm often, the group I work with, the Nevada Desert Experience, every year has a walk from Las Vegas to the nuclear test site, 70 miles away. And we do it during Holy Week. And then have on Good Friday, in the morning, have a protest at the nuclear test site. And so I've been in Las Vegas area many times over Holy Week, and I have friends who belong to a Italo-Greek Catholic church in Las Vegas. And I've often been there for Holy Week services. So our protest was done in the morning on Good Friday, and I went with my friends. What they do, one of the things they do in this particular church is they have a makeshift coffin with an image of Christ embroidered over it, and they carry it like a funeral procession through the church, and then they set it up, and it's on trellises, and it's about as high as a dining room table, and everybody who can takes turns getting down on their knees and crawling under this, the tomb of Christ, and coming up the other side. And I had that, that same kind of visceral feeling. But I think to your question, it's if you look at the early writings of Dorothy Day and Peter Morin, it's clear like the House of Hospitality was something they had no intention of doing. They were writing about other people should do this, or everybody should do it. And I think some ways, Dorothy said sometimes that a soup line is a disgrace, because if it's hospitality and you're treating everyone like Christ, having Christ wait in line, going around the block, to be fed is doesn't seem to be very pious, very, very respectful of the majesty of Christ to make Christ be in a soup line. But that's the necessity, that's the reality. So they only did hospitality because people came knocking on the doors. And what they really wanted was what Peter called an agronomic university, and to return to a back to the land kind of movement. In fact, when they got their first farm in the 1930s, Dorothy wrote in her column assuring that they weren't going to abandon the city altogether. But what's happened through history, and I think, again, it is a change is happening after Dorothy's death. The back to the land part of it, which was supposed to be, the movement was intended to be a rural back to the land movement with a presence in the city, and that reversed itself. And that's to a certain extent gone back. And even the urban houses are doing more gardening and things. I think one big change is every year, every September, there's at a retreat center in Eastern Iowa, there's a Midwest Catholic Worker Gathering. And in recent years, pre-COVID anyway, it'd be maybe, more than 100 people showing up from Catholic worker houses, mostly around the Midwest, and for eating and singing and praying, and it's pretty informal. Anyway, I was really struck a few years ago when the people who cooked the first meal for Friday evening said, all the food here is from a Catholic worker farm. Everything here but the salt. I thought, well, we need a Catholic worker salt mine, but haven't done anything about that yet. 10 years before, everything would have been dumpstered. Everything would have been from a food pantry or a food bank. It all would have been industrial food. So it's not all of this, they're collected from different Catholic worker houses. So not every, I think even the Catholic worker houses that are in cities, many of them have big garden projects. And I think that's a very, very important piece. And also most of the Catholic worker farms that existed until the last 30 or 40 years existed with the idea of their main purpose was raising food for a city house. And when we started, my wife Betsy lived at the Catholic worker farm at Tivoli in upstate New York for some time, which is very definitely an outpost of the New York Catholic worker. And when we came here, it's like, well, who's here in Southwest Iowa? Whose farm are you? Like, what city house runs you and owns you? And we say, no, it's just us. We live in a town which now the population is probably about 25 people in a county that has less than 5,000 people. And abandoned houses are what symbolizes poverty here, not homeless people. So yeah, we do hospitality in all kinds of ways. Rarely, because we are 30 miles from the nearest fast food. Or from jobs and things, sometimes it does happen that there are people who come here because they need a place to stay. More often, there are people who are coming to learn to garden, learn to weave. We have had the last few years had several young people come and stay with us. Very young people, newly divorced and figuring out what to do with their lives, and staying here for months at a time. At present, it's just me and Betsy here, but for most of our years here, there have been people with us for, more than a year at a time. So we're active in the community and in the church, and we raise most of our food. We have dairy goats. Right now, we're milking 2, and that's enough. We're make a lot of cheese and yogurt. We share that with neighbors. We have chickens for eggs, and we're having a very hard time this year with drought. But most of the years, most of the food that we eat is stuff that we grow, and that's, I think, a really important part of nonviolence is to not be such a burden on the earth. And I think we are not vegans or vegetarians, and I really understand what a lot of people for their concern for the earth making those choices. But the way, if I go to a grocery store here in Iowa, we're in the biggest agricultural state, but the food that I'd buy at the grocery store, it's trucked in from California. It's grown in the Central Valley by fossil water. With fantastic amounts of of petrochemicals involved in the raising of it. Yeah, it's really questionable what the carbon footprint of tofu bought in the grocery store and the chicken that I butcher myself. It doesn't, it's hard. It is not so simple to say that if I eat vegetables, I'm being kinder to the earth. I really think industrial agriculture is something that needs to be resisted as much as war. My first visit from 2009 to 2018, I made 7 or 8 visits to Afghanistan. And my first visit, through a series of very strange accidents, I got to meet the governor of the Kabul province, who is a man who had escaped during the Civil War years before and was a professor at Virginia Tech and had returned to Afghanistan after the Taliban fell that time to try to help his country. And he was somebody, of course, very much educated in the United States and very much into Western ways of doing things. But he said he felt like for the future of Afghanistan, the biggest threat to security of Afghanistan was the Western style industrial agriculture that was being imported, that the United States military, the National Guard units from my own state were going there and teaching people these methods. These Afghanistan was, before all these wars, was a breadbasket for the region. It's an exporter of food, all from small family farms. And at the time that first visit, it was really poppies for heroin were the biggest cash crop. They needed to have something change, but to bring these all these genetically modified seeds and these methods of growing the crops that need very few people to work, but they need lots of machinery and they need lots of petrochemical fertilizers and pesticides. I see our work here on the land is kind of an act of resistance. It's a great way to live. We live very, very well on very little money. We live very, very cheaply and live a life that it's almost scandalously luxurious for all the things that we have. Everything that we do, the things that the world is facing. I think that there's a very false dichotomy between being faithful and effective, because I think the thing that's going to make you least effective is by trying to be effective. By if you're just going to wait until do the things that are going to work, you're not going to do very much, and you're going to end up being involved in political stuff that may even make things worse. But everything we're doing, like a soup line, is not going to feed all the hungry people. I really knew that in New York, that we had to shut the door. We did not feed everybody who came to the door. We would feed like 300 people, and the soup is gone, and we've got to shut the door and tell people, no, we can't feed you. And we didn't have room for everybody who knocked on the door and said, I need a bed. But we said, no, I'm sorry, 1,000 times for every time that we would say yes. That's just the harsh reality. But it's a prayer, and it's a gesture. Sitting on the railroad tracks into a nuclear weapons plant is not going to stop the arms race, but it's a prayer and it's a gesture toward that. And I think the same thing with growing our own eggplants instead of getting them from California, growing our own tomatoes, making our own cheese. But I really think it's these gestures and these prayers are our only hope, because we are, the way the world is now with global warming and with climate change, and global warming, climate change, and the whole threat of nuclear weapons. Organized life on this planet for human beings and many other species is coming to a quick end unless we make some really drastic changes, unless the world makes some kinds of changes that we haven't seen in humanity before. And I'm not hopeless. I'm not optimistic, but I'm not hopeless. And I think the reality is, like, what are you going to do facing that? And it's like it doesn't, we're either on the edge of a great change or on the edge of the kingdom of God coming to earth, and people living their lives completely differently and basing our economy and our life together in very, very different ways, or we're all going to be dead. Whichever way it turns out, what you do is the same thing. is you hope and you pray and you get together with other people who are hoping and praying, even if they're not aware that they're praying. Sometimes they are, and maybe they're the most effective prayers are from the atheists. So either we're a part of that change or we are a part, and I think this is very, very important. And I've worked a lot with older people as well, and I've worked with many people who are terminal, and how we go makes a really big difference. And we can be, as a species and as individuals, we can be in denial and pretend it's not happening, or we can be in so much fear we need to be medicated all the time in order to get through the day. Or we can look at it soberly and maturely and say, okay, things are really, really bad. We're really fucked. But what do we do now? And how do we treat one another? And that isn't giving up, because it's those doing that is that what's most likely kind of the way that we live to go out gracefully will also be the thing that the one small chance we have will be in that. Because if we keep going the way we're going, and if our politics keep going the way we're going, if our only choice is between Trump and Biden, forget it. Forget it. We're not. It's done. We have to have something more radical. And
I definitely agree. And like the Catholic workers that I've gone to, like I went to one that was serving a suburban community that also had like a farm set up, and they had like a harvest festival, and all of the food that was there was what they grew themselves, and it was just like so, like the food was just so good. It was like, and the vegetables were like the same that you could have bought at the store, but like they just tasted better. With inflation going up the way that it is, I mean, poverty is only going to get worse. And I'm preaching to myself as well, because like I took some horticulture classes in high school, and I have a bit of a green thumb, but like I want to get more into growing my own food and stuff, because it's like, if you know how to like grow your own food, there's a sense of autonomy in that. You talked about this a bit earlier, but like, what are some of your favorite stories with Dorothy in your life?
Talk to people of your generation. I'm always amazed at the parts of the culture of my youth that you know and what you don't know. But Carly Simon had a song, "I Haven't Got Time for the Pain." Does that ring a bell?
No, I'm sorry.
It's a stupid romantic song. It's very catchy, but it's a love song, and says, "It used to be, before I knew you, I was sad and I was depressed and I worried about the world. But now that I know you, I haven't got time for the pain." And the refrain repeats that over and over. "I haven't got time for the pain. I haven't got time for the pain." One day I was in the office at Mary House, the newspaper office, working on something, and I was by myself and had the radio on. And Dorothy always listened to opera. And this office was right between the chapel, where Dorothy was often spent hours every day, and the bathroom. So she walked by the office on her way to or from, and she stopped. She was leaning, she was very tall, but that time walking with a cane, bent over. And she stopped and didn't look at me, but she cocked her ear and was listening to the lyrics. And she stood up tall and looked at me in rage, shaking her cane. "You must always have time for the pain."
Oh my God.
And shook her head and walked on. Because she's blaming me for my whole generation. But yeah, I think it's part of our culture that peace of mind and pleasure and joy come from not closing your eyes to the pain of the world. And I've worked for years when my kids were small at a nursing home in our county seat town as a nurse's aide. And there were people there whose parents and grandparents were residents in the home who wouldn't bring their little kids to see grandma. And they said, "I don't want my kid to see grandma in the state that she's in. I don't want to see the kids see grandma in the wheelchair, or even grandma in bed with an IV drip keeping her alive, or a nasal tube to feed her. I don't want our kids to see grandma like that. I want them to have the memories of grandma." And it just made me really, really sad, because the reality of it, grandma's going to die, and it's going to hit those kids, like a, brick bat on the side of the head out of nowhere. No, the kids would be fine. The kids are not going to be freaked out seeing grandma's suffering, and grandma would love it. But this idea that if you isolate yourself from suffering and don't see it, if you don't think about the people starving in Afghanistan right now, if you can put that out of mind, you can put off, don't think about what global warming is doing, and how Lake Mead is going dry, and how the tundras are thawing. If you not think about that you're going to have more peace of mind and more joy. And that really isn't true. I think that's just more alienating and more. Yeah, you find that the people who are happiest are the people who look the pain and the suffering and the horrors and the fears of the world, just look it in the eye and assess it soberly and do what you can about it. But that's where real peace comes from. and joy. It's not a matter of anesthetizing ourselves to the world or hiding from it. It's a deadly life to be in denial.
Like, I think that people misunderstand the Catholic theology around suffering, but like suffering is it's a part of life. And I think that something that's really beautiful about the Catholic faith is that it kind of provides a space, for people experiencing suffering and having people feel like it's okay to feel sorrow. It's okay, like I have a devotion to Our Lady of Sorrows. Like it's okay to like acknowledge those parts of life, and you should acknowledge those parts of life. What do you wish more people knew about Dorothy Day?
What I was talking about before, about her loving the church for Christ made visible, but being able to be scandalized by what it is in the institution. That's okay. Not just that it's okay. The way she put it was, we must live in a state of permanent dissatisfaction with the church. We must. That's the imperative. That if you're not dissatisfied with it, you don't love it. And real love is never blind to the problems of our loved ones. We don't really love somebody. We don't accept them wholly if we don't see their faults. If we're blind to them, pretend that they're not there. So we have to. I think that's very important for the church to have a saint who is somebody that they can, who, as we're appalled, as we're scandalized, we can, that's okay. That doesn't break us off from it, that we can be. But I think something that I have found irksome in the last few years is this identity with Dorothy, with the you read articles saying that she preferred the old Latin Mass. One of my favorites is she would never allow a priest to say Mass without wearing the proper vestments. Not only do people believe things like that, but they think that that's the most important thing. And it's what they love about Dorothy Day, is that she stood up for those things. I got an email exchange with a young man at one of the Catholic worker houses that they're trying to resurrect the true spirit of Dorothy Day. And he had some questions about, and I sent, there's a, Robert Coles, I mentioned before, wrote a book about the Catholic worker, A Spectacle Unto the World, and it has photographs by John Erickson, who's a great photographer. And I love the book because it was made in 73, just before I got there. And it's just the way that the Catholic worker looked when I was there. And I recognized most of the people in the pictures. But I sent this, I shared some photographs I scanned and sent him some photographs of Dan Berrigan saying Mass at St. Joseph's House in 1973. And it was right after he got out of prison for the Catonsville draft board raid. And Dan is wearing a turtleneck sweater and no stole. And he has a ceramic chalice. And people are receiving communion, serving themselves in the hand, holding out a ceramic plate, and each person, including Dorothy, picking it up in their hands and receiving communion and then taking the cup. It's very, very clear what's happening, and the Dorothy Day is there, and she's not mad. And this young man just said, well, that completely confounds everything he ever thought about Dorothy Day. And I thought, how sad, and really how almost disrespectful, I think, to think that Dorothy Day was hung up on those things. She had a very deep and mature devotion to the Eucharist that didn't depend on the costume the priest was wearing. Because I was there for 4 years. We had Mass a couple times a week. Never ever, a priest coming to say Mass in the house wearing the proper vestments. Not a time. It would have been okay if they wanted to, but it was like people like, everybody could dress any way they wanted. And if Father wants to wear that getup, that's fine. We're not going to, somebody else is dressed like a railroad engineer and somebody else is wearing a policeman's uniform or stuff. That's fine. uh, not hung up on that stuff. But I think I'm sad that people think that that's like the most important thing about her, or that some young people and other theologians made this manifesto in the Catholic tradition that talks about, addresses communion in the hand, but doesn't address nuclear weapons, and doesn't address racism, doesn't address heterosexism. And it's clear, people have these ideas, and they're clearly debunked by Dorothy's own writing. When the mass change issues, I don't know how we stood that. The old mass, and people just sitting by and watching and not participating. And she loved the guitar being played at mass. And it doesn't mean that she was less devoted. It means that she could see, she saw what was really important, and it wasn't those accoutrements, she called them, with which we surround the sacraments.
Thank you so much for telling us all that stuff, because something that I have been, seeing, it's like people get so hung up on, like, I know that like the traditional Latin mass is kind of a more like polarizing thing in the Catholic community than it used to be, because it used to just be like just the regular mass or whatever. But like, I mean, I think that like the TLM mass is beautiful, but it's like I grew up like in like the Novus Ordo tradition. I actually did liturgical dancing actually in my parish. Like we had guitar masses, we had all of it. And I mean, and I always felt loved as a kid in my parish. I always felt like
Good.
I'm very grateful for that. Like I liked it being warm and fuzzy. I liked all of that. And it's like, and when I was older and I found like the TLM, I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was reverent. But I also see why the reforms happened. A lot of people, this is my theory anyway, but it's like I think that a lot of people that kind of have this more traditional mindset, they want to figure out a way that they can make sense of Dorothy Day. So they think if they could be like, oh, well, she really loved the TLM, like that can maybe like get people like on board of like, oh, she was super orthodox about that the priest had to be wearing the special outfit, and like even if it's not really true. That's why we have to just be committed to what the truth is, like of like when it's not like that like Dorothy didn't like this like the traditional Latin mass, but it was just that she was okay with like she just was happy there was a mass happening, I'm sure.
Right.
What would be your advice for anybody who wants to get involved with the Catholic worker, especially progressive activists that might want to do the kind of work that you're doing?
Finding community. And I think also if that we are people to do this work with, and people to protest with, and they're around. I think too, it's like I think reading there's a lot of good books out there. There's some pretty lousy ones too, but there's a lot of good stuff, and Dorothy's own writings and Peter Morin's writings are available. And I think it's easy to go to primary sources, not just hear what other people have said about her. Especially, I think often the more people praise Dorothy, the less accurate their story is. Being dismissed as a saint made her sick. Not to put that on the pedestal, and not to make that like a guide to Catholic worker orthodoxy, because there isn't. Yeah, find a community and find friends, and talk together, pray together, and look at the times, because this has always been. I think that's looking at the Catholic worker starting in the 1930s. If you look at the first issue of the Catholic Worker, it was very much responding to what was going on at the moment. And some people fault the Catholic Worker for, in the 1940s, as World War II started, having less articles about the labor movement and less articles about racism. But of course, there was a world war going on, and then there were nuclear weapons, and then there were then there were, now the United States has 800 bases in 70 different countries around the world, and that didn't exist before. There wasn't a military industrial complex. So what it is It isn't that those issues of race and labor got to be less important. It's just that there were lots of other things to talk about, lots of other things to deal with. So it really is very much wherever the Catholic worker is, in whatever time, in whatever place, it's not an abstract idea that then you try to form a world around. It's the real world. This is what's happening now, in this place, in this time. How do we respond? I have a good friend who died a few years ago, was a Franciscan priest, Jerry Zawada, and he would really get frustrated when people would say, well, what would St. Francis do? He says, what difference does it make what somebody 800 years ago in Italy, what that person would do if he were here today? What could be more irrelevant at all? It's like, no, Francis did what Francis did in 11th and 12th century, 12th and 13th century Italy, with the people around him, the Crusades going on, feudalism falling apart. He responded to the times. And the same thing what Dorothy did in the 1930s. So yes, so we don't follow Dorothy's footsteps at all by going to the Latin Mass, because that's what she did in 1933, or necessarily starting a soup line like she did in 1933. We're in different places and different times. God has given us different gifts, and we have to find community and find ways to respond to the times, just like these other people did. And the idea of dressing in the clothes that they wore, or praying just the way they did. Remembering St. Francis was even before the Tridentine Mass.
Right.
So
right.
the mass that he celebrated, his encounters with the Eucharist were they didn't have tabernacles in the churches in those days. They didn't have, Francis never saw a holy hour or
All these different
or a
things.
benediction, because those things didn't exist yet. Those are things of the time. They are not timeless. We need to find our ways in our own very, very particular, very peculiar time. That's very, very different from when St. Francis was around, or even Dorothy Day was around. So what we need to do is do what they did and respond to the time.
Amen to that. Well, and it's like, I just think that, like, I love like the phrase of like doing things like in the spirit of Vatican II, like doing things in this, like the spirit is still there, and it's like following the Holy Spirit and seeing how the Holy Spirit moves like the wind through the times, and that the spirit is eternal, even if the material reality changes. How does the world need Dorothy Day's message today?
I think one thing Dan Berrigan said about Dorothy Day is she lived as though the truth were true. And I think that is, and I think that kind of speaks to what I was saying earlier in the conversation about what I was looking for as a young person. Is, if this is true, how then do we live? What do we do? And it doesn't just govern what we do, the particular place we go to pray on a Sunday morning. If Christ is in the poor, which we believe from the Gospels, then how do we respond to Christ? And there's no template for that. There's no rule for that. But it has to be somehow. It has to be. That's what this work is. We just don't need more abstract academic ideas. We act on the things that we know and believe.
Something that you've been saying of just like how important it is to like make your life a prayer, how important it, and how like protest can be a prayer, and how like I remember reading how Dorothy Day would would listen to music, and that would be like a form of prayer, or would walk in the garden and that'd be a form of prayer. Like I feel like that just like expanding the definition of what prayer is, I think, is something that the world definitely needs right now. And we need nonviolence, and we need justice. And I think that Dorothy Day definitely lived her life by the truth and treated what's true as true. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. And I'll include some of Brian's writings in the description box below. And yeah, so thank you guys for watching. I'm Cassidy, I'm the hippie Catholic. God bless.
God bless.